The best gift you could give me is you dying for my inheritance." Those were the words my own son said to me on Christmas Eve in the house I had raised him in. My name is Sophia. For years, I was just the quiet widow, the loving mother he and his wife saw as a simple, aging obstacle. What they didn't know is that the confused old woman they were trying to put in a home was the secret architect of their entire financial world. They thought they were planning my end, but they had actually just triggered their own. Have you ever been completely underestimated by the people who should have known you best? I would be honored to hear your story of strength in the comments below. The scent of pine needles and cinnamon filled my kitchen, a familiar comfort on the first morning of Christmas week, but a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach that had nothing to do with holiday stress. Outside, a gentle snow was beginning to fall, dusting the quiet suburban street in a blanket of pristine white. It should have been peaceful. For 40 years, this house had been my sanctuary, but lately it had begun to feel more like a gilded cage, with the bars slowly closing in. I ran a soft cloth over the silver frame on the mantelpiece, my fingers tracing the outline of my late husband's smiling face. "Oh, David," I whispered to the empty room, "what would you think of the man our son has become?" From the living room, I could hear the faint drone of a football game on TV, a sound that always reminded me of David's quiet, steady presence on a Sunday afternoon. He'd been gone for 5 years, but the silence he left behind was a physical presence, especially during the holidays. I missed his wisdom, his calm, the way he could see straight to the heart of a matter. He would have known what to do about Joseph. My hands, dusted with flour, moved on autopilot, kneading dough for a batch of cinnamon rolls. I remembered a Christmas, maybe 25 years ago, when a tiny Joseph stood on a stool beside me, his face smeared with flour, trying to roll his own lopsided creations. "We're making memories, Mommy," he had said, his voice full of innocent joy. The memory was so vivid it was painful. Where had that boy gone? The man who called me now was a stranger, his voice clipped and distant, his life intertwined with a woman I struggled to understand. Just as I was shaping the last of the rolls, my phone chimed on the counter. It wasn't a call, but a bank alert. My heart sank a little as I wiped my hands and picked it up. Payment of $500 to Capital One, successful. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shaky breath. It was the monthly credit card payment I secretly made for Joseph and his wife, Amber, a habit that had started 2 years ago as a temporary loan and had since become an unspoken, permanent fixture of my budget. I had to use coupons at the grocery store and put off repairing the rattling engine in my 10-year-old car so they could enjoy dinners at restaurants I could only dream of. A flicker of resentment, hot and sharp, flared in my chest, but I quickly suppressed it. He was my son. A mother's duty was to help, wasn't it? Steeling myself, I dialed his number to confirm their plans for Christmas Eve. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Mom, I'm a little busy. What's up?" "I was just calling to see what time you and Amber would be here on Christmas Eve," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "I'm planning on making a ham." There was a muffled sound, and then Amber's voice, sweet as honey, came on the line. "Sophia, hi, we are so excited. We'll probably be there around 6. I hope it's not too much trouble for you with the house being so cramped. It's hard to fit everyone in." The word hung in the air, a perfectly aimed dart. My house, the 2-story home where I had raised my son, where we had hosted decades of family gatherings, was now cramped. "We'll manage," I said, my voice tight. "I'm sure we will," she chirped. "By the way, Sophia, have you given any more thought to our suggestion? That big house is a lot for one person." The question, posed so casually, ruined what little festive mood I had managed to cling to. It landed with the weight of an ultimatum, a stark reminder of their true purpose. The ham, the cinnamon rolls, the shared memories, they were all just obstacles in the way of what they really wanted, "I'll see you on Christmas Eve, Mom," Joseph said, his voice distant as he came back on the line. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't coming for a celebration, but for a confrontation, and this year I was starting to feel too old and too tired to fight it. The doorbell rang, sharp and demanding, cutting through the melody of Silent Night, playing softly from my old radio. It was exactly 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve. For a moment I considered not answering, just letting the moment stretch into a silent, solitary peace. But I was a mother, and the hope that this Christmas might be different, that I might see a glimpse of the son I once knew, was a stubborn, foolish thing. I smoothed the front of my worn-out burgundy sweater and walked to the door, a cheerful facade pasted on my face like a fragile ornament. As they stepped inside, a gust of cold December air followed them in, but it was nothing compared to the chill that settled in my heart. My eyes fell on the expensive, brand-name coat Amber was wearing, a plush, cream-colored wool creation that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. The $500 credit card bill I just paid for them flashed in my mind. She shrugged it off with a practiced air of casual elegance, revealing a sleek black dress underneath. Joseph followed her, stamping the snow from his boots, his gaze fixed on the floor. He handed me a bottle of wine with a mumbled, "Merry Christmas, Mom," but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "It smells wonderful in here, Sophia," Amber said, her voice echoing in the hallway as she surveyed my festive decorations with a critical eye. "You always try so hard." The compliment felt like a finely sharpened needle. We sat down at the dining table, the one David had built with his own 2 hands over 40 years ago. It was laden with his favorite Christmas foods, a honey-glazed roast ham, creamy mashed potatoes, and my special green bean casserole topped with crispy onions. The flickering candlelight cast a warm glow, but it couldn't penetrate the thick, unspoken tension between us. Dinner was an awkward affair. Amber dominated the conversation, talking endlessly about their friends who had just bought a new, larger home in a gated community. "It's just amazing what you can do with more space, you know," she mused, delicately pushing a piece of ham around her plate. "They have a dedicated home office for Brian and a nursery already planned. They're thinking ahead." Joseph remained quiet, a ghost at his own family's table, only speaking to agree with Amber. "Yeah, it's a nice place," he'd murmur, his focus on cutting his food into unnecessarily small pieces. I tried to steer the conversation back to us, to our shared history. "Joseph, do you remember the Christmas you were 7? Your father gave you that bright red bicycle, and you rode it right here in the dining room, nearly knocking over the tree." Amber let out a small, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Sophia, always living in the past. We have to look toward the future." She turned to Joseph, her expression softening into one of feigned concern. "Speaking of which, honey, I was driving through the north side today, and I passed the most beautiful new community, Golden Years Senior Living." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "It was incredible," she went on, her eyes bright with a salesman's pitch. "They have beautiful gardens, a swimming pool, social activities, bingo on Tuesdays, plus a nurse is on duty 24/7. You'd be so much safer there, Sophia. We worry about you all alone in this big old house." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. My safety, my well-being, it all sounded so reasonable, so loving. But I knew it was a lie, a beautifully wrapped package of pure, unadulterated greed. Before I could form a reply, Joseph reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a glossy, tri-fold brochure and placed it on the pristine white tablecloth right next to the platter of ham. The brochure for Golden Years Senior Living. On the cover, a smiling silver-haired couple was playing chess in a sun-drenched library. "We're just thinking of you, Mom," he said, but his eyes were as cold and empty as a winter sky. I stared at the smiling, elderly couple on the brochure, their manufactured happiness a cruel mockery of my own reality. The aroma of the ham suddenly made me nauseous. "So this is my Christmas gift?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a thread of sound in the sudden, crushing silence. An eviction notice. The silence that followed my question was a cold, heavy blanket, smothering the last embers of Christmas cheer. Amber's manufactured smile froze on her lips, and Joseph finally looked up from his plate, his expression a mixture of irritation and guilt. He couldn't even meet my gaze. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the logs shifting in the fireplace, a dying warmth in a room that had suddenly gone frigid. "That's not funny, Mom," Joseph finally muttered, pushing his chair back from the table. He walked into the living room and stood with his back to me, staring into the dwindling flames. Amber followed him, placing a proprietary hand on his shoulder. I gathered what was left of my strength and stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I followed them into the living room, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. I looked at my son, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose heartbreaks I'd mended, and saw only a stranger with his father's eyes, a stranger who was conspiring to erase me from my own life. "It wasn't a joke," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "This is my home. It was your father's home. It is not for sale." The finality in my tone seemed to snap something in Amber. She spun around, her face a mask of indignation. "Selfish," she hissed, the word sharp as glass. "That's what this is. You're being incredibly selfish. You're holding on to the past while ruining our future. We need a proper home to start a family. And you're sitting here in this big, empty house hoarding memories." The cruelty of her words took my breath away, but I refused to look at her. My fight was not with this venomous woman my son had chosen. My fight was for the soul of my son himself. I looked past her, my eyes pleading with Joseph. "Joseph, please," I begged, my voice cracking with a pain that was 40 years deep. "This isn't just a house. It's our life. It's your father's memory. This is about more than money." I took a step toward him, my hand outstretched, hoping to find some flicker of the boy who once clung to my leg, who once told me I was his whole world. He turned, and the look on his face stopped me cold. It was not the face of my son. It was a face contorted with a rage and entitlement I'd never seen before, a grotesque mask of pure, unadulterated greed. "You want to know what this is about, Mom?" he snarled, his voice a low, vicious growl. He took a step toward me, his body thrumming with a terrible energy. "It's about my inheritance, the one you're sitting on, wasting away in this mausoleum." His voice rose to a shout that echoed in the silent house, each word a physical blow. "Honestly, the best gift you could give me is you dying for my inheritance." The words hung in the air, monstrous and irreversible. Time seemed to stop. The fire, the Christmas tree, the photographs on the wall, everything faded into a dull, gray haze. He had said it. The terrible, unthinkable thing was now real, spoken into existence. Amber stood beside him, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. They stood there, a united front against me, their faces illuminated by the dying firelight. Then, without another word, they turned and walked out. The slam of the front door was like a gunshot in the dead of night. As they slammed the door behind them, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my life, I felt something inside me die. The soft, forgiving heart of a mother shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But in its place, something else, cold and sharp, began to grow. Christmas morning dawned gray and silent. There were no presents under the tree, no joyful carols, only the echo of my son's monstrous words. The house was cold, the fire from the night before, long dead, leaving a scent of ash that hung in the air like a funeral shroud. I sat on the sofa, wrapped in a quilt, and stared at the congealed remains of the Christmas Eve dinner still sitting on the dining room table. The ham, the potatoes, the untouched casserole, it was all a monument to a family that had just died. I hadn't slept. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Joseph's face, twisted with greed, and heard his voice dripping with a venom I never knew he possessed. Eventually, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a slow, burning anger. I wouldn't let this be the end. I wouldn't let them win. With mechanical movements, I stood up and walked to the dining room. The physical act of clearing the table felt like the first step toward reclaiming my life. I scraped the expensive ham into the trash. I poured the fine wine Joseph had brought down the sink. I threw the festive napkins, the half-burned candles, and all the trappings of a celebration that had been a lie into a black garbage bag. It was cathartic, a purging of the previous night's poison. As I wiped the table clean, my gaze fell upon the closed door of David's old study, a room I hadn't entered in years. It was his sanctuary, a place of wood shavings, blueprints, and quiet contemplation. He always used to say, "The answers are always in the paperwork, Sophia." For the first time, I felt compelled to look for them. The door creaked open, revealing a room preserved in time. A thin layer of dust covered every surface. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, wood, and his faint, lingering cologne. It felt like stepping into a memory. On his large oak desk, everything was just as he had left it 5 years ago. My eyes scanned the room, landing on a heavy steel file cabinet tucked into a corner. One I'd never paid much attention to. A yellowed piece of paper was taped to the top drawer, secured with old, brittle tape. David's familiar, strong handwriting was on it. For Sophia, when you truly need it. My breath caught in my throat. He had known. Somehow he had anticipated a day like this, a day when I would truly need help. A frantic search began for the key. It wasn't on his keychain or in the desk drawers. Then I remembered his favorite book, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that sat on his nightstand. Tucked inside, marking his favorite passage, was a small silver key. With a trembling hand, I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I pulled the drawer open. It was filled with meticulously organized folders, their labels written in David's neat script, but they were titles I had never seen before: real estate holdings, stock portfolio, trust account details. My husband had been a simple carpenter, or so I thought. This was the paperwork of a wealthy man. At the very front of the drawer, I saw the first folder, its label simple and cryptic: JH Discretionary Support. My heart pounded as I lifted it out. Inside were not deeds or stock certificates, but years of bank statements. Transfer after transfer, month after month, to an account I didn't recognize. But I recognized the name on the statements: Joseph Hughes. $500 here, $1,000 there for a car repair, another $800 for rent assistance. It was all there, in black and white. For years, David, and then the estate he left behind, had been secretly subsidizing our son's life. The expensive coat Amber wore, the nice apartment they lived in, it had all been paid for by the father he now wished was dead for an inheritance he was already receiving. A wave of nausea washed over me. I closed the folder, my mind reeling. I needed help. I needed someone who understood this world David had hidden from me. I picked up the phone. "Michael, it's Sophia Hughes. I need to see you. It's about David's estate." As I waited for him to reply, I stared at the numbers, the dates, the sheer volume of my unknown generosity. But it was the last file in the drawer, its bold block letters almost shouting at me, that made my blood run cold. It was labeled Contingency Plan. Michael Chen, David's estate lawyer, looked at me over his glasses, his expression shifting from professional sympathy to sharp concern as I recounted Joseph's words. He steepled his fingers, the polished mahogany of his desk reflecting the cold, gray light of the day after Christmas. His office on the 21st floor of a downtown skyscraper was a world of sleek lines, dark leather, and quiet power. A universe away from my cozy, cluttered home. I felt small in the large chair, clutching the old file folders to my chest as if they were a life raft. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Michael slowly took off his glasses and polished them with a silk cloth. "David always said you were the strongest person he knew," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "He also said your son had a weakness for the easy way out. It seems your husband was a very perceptive man." The words were a small comfort, a reminder that the man I had loved and trusted had seen the world, and our son, with clear eyes. "I didn't come here for comfort, Michael," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I came for answers. What are these files?" He took the folders from me, his expert hands navigating the papers David had left behind. He started with the largest one, estate portfolio. He opened it, revealing page after page of numbers and legal descriptions that made my head spin. "Sophia," he began gently, "I honored David's wish to keep you shielded from the complexities of this, but he always intended for you to take control if you ever needed to. You are not a woman of modest means. You are a very wealthy woman." He turned a page. "Your stock portfolio is currently valued at just over $2 million. The trust generates an annual income of approximately $150,000, most of which has been automatically reinvested for years." I stared at him, speechless. The numbers were meaningless, astronomical. I thought of the coupons I clipped, the sweaters I mended. "There's more," he said, turning another page. "David was a brilliant real estate investor. You own 3 commercial properties downtown and—" He paused, looking at me intently. "You are the sole owner of the Parkview Terrace apartment building." My blood ran cold. "Parkview Terrace?" I whispered. "Yes," Michael confirmed, "the very same building where your son, Joseph, currently resides. You have been his landlord for the past 3 years." The irony was so staggering, so cruel, that I almost laughed. I had been subsidizing his life in more ways than I could ever have imagined. I pushed the JH Discretionary Support folder across the desk. "And this?" Michael reviewed the statements. "Ah, yes, the discretionary fund. This was David's idea. He set up a separate, anonymous account managed by a third party to provide Joseph with financial aid without him ever knowing it came from the family estate. The payments were structured to look like bonuses or tax refunds. It was David's way of helping him without feeding his sense of entitlement." He looked up at me. "It seems that strategy failed." Finally, I pushed the last folder toward him, my hand trembling slightly. "And this one? The contingency plan?" Michael's expression grew somber. "This was David's last gift to you, Sophia, his protection. He worried that one day, Joseph's ambition and Amber's influence might lead to this. This file is a legal framework, a step-by-step guide on how to protect yourself. It gives you multiple avenues, cutting off funds, asset freezes, even legal grounds for emancipation from filial responsibility if they were to try to have you declared incompetent." We sat in silence as I absorbed the full weight of my husband's foresight. He had left me not just a fortune, but a shield, a playbook for a war he had hoped I would never have to fight. My mind raced, connecting the dots. They saw me as old, as weak, as confused. They wanted a frail, dependent mother they could easily manipulate. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time, a bitter, unfamiliar expression. "So," I said, my voice low and steady, "if they want me to be a frail, confused old woman, perhaps I should give them exactly what they want." Michael's eyes lit up with a glint of understanding. He saw the strategist that had just been born from the ashes of a grieving mother. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. He picked up his phone. "I know just the man for the security system," he said, dialing a number. "He's discreet. By the end of the week, your house will have more eyes and ears than the CIA." The 2 men who arrived to install the medical alert system were polite, efficient, and never once made eye contact with me for too long. They were ghosts, just as Michael had promised. They moved through my home with a quiet, practiced purpose, their tool belts making only the softest of clinks. One worked in the kitchen, replacing a standard power outlet with one that housed a pinhole lens. The other was in the living room, carefully mounting a new state-of-the-art smoke detector on the ceiling, one that did far more than detect smoke. The atmosphere in the house was one of quiet conspiracy, and I felt a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. My home, the scene of my deepest humiliation, was being transformed into a stage for my vindication. The lead installer, a man with a serious face and surprisingly gentle hands, called me into the living room. He pointed to a small, nearly invisible lens nestled in the decorative scrollwork above the mantelpiece. "This one covers the whole living room, ma'am. Crystal clear." My gaze drifted from the lens down to the exact spot on the coffee table where Joseph had placed that glossy brochure, the one advertising the end of my life as I knew it. The camera's unblinking eye would have a perfect front row seat. A grim satisfaction settled over me. Yes, crystal clear. Before they left, the man handed me my phone. He had installed an app, its icon disguised as a simple gardening planner. With a few taps, he showed me how to access the live feeds from the 4 hidden cameras and the audio from the discrete microphones. I could watch and listen to what was happening in my own home, from anywhere, at any time. The technology felt alien in my hands, but I absorbed his instructions with a fierce focus. This was my new weapon, and I would learn to wield it with precision. After the ghosts had vanished as silently as they had appeared, the house was quiet once more. But it was a different kind of quiet. It felt charged, alive, like a held breath. It was a stage, and my performance was about to begin. I sat in my kitchen for a full 10 minutes, rehearsing the quaver in my voice, the note of confusion I needed to strike. Then, I took a deep breath and dialed Joseph's number. He answered with an impatient, "Mom, what's wrong now?" I pitched my voice to sound frail, shaky. "Joseph, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I was in the kitchen and I can't seem to remember. Did I leave the stove on?" I let a little sob catch in my throat. I get so mixed up these days. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Then his voice came, dripping with the patronizing tone of a parent speaking to a difficult child. But underneath it, I heard the unmistakable hum of excitement. "See, Mom? This is what we were worried about. It's okay, just stay in your chair. Don't touch anything. Don't worry, Amber and I will come check on you this evening." "Oh, would you? You're such a good son," I whimpered, playing my part to perfection. I hung up the phone, and my hand was steady. He had taken the bait. That evening, before they were due to arrive, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I hunched my shoulders slightly, let my hair fall in a more disheveled way around my face, and practiced a look of vacant confusion. The woman in the reflection looked frail, lost, and old, the perfect picture of a mother who needed her son to take control. She was everything I was fighting not to be. But as I stared into the mirror, past the convincing facade, I saw my own eyes burning back at me with a cold, sharp clarity. This was not weakness. This was war paint. I walked into the living room, sank into my favorite armchair, and pulled out my phone. I opened the gardening app, and the screen split into 4 silent waiting squares. The hidden cameras were now active. The trap was set. Now I just needed the mice to walk into it. Their voices, filtered through my phone's speaker, were clear and cruel, a private conversation made public in the sanctuary of my bedroom. I lay in the darkness, the screen of my phone casting a cold blue light on my face, my breath held tight in my chest. They had arrived an hour earlier, finding me exactly where I had said I would be, sitting in my armchair, looking lost. I played my part beautifully. I feigned surprise at their arrival, then gratitude. I let Joseph guide me to the kitchen, his hand on my elbow as if I were a fragile piece of glass. "See, Mom, the stove is off. You just forgot." he said, his voice slow and loud, the way one speaks to a small child or a fool. Amber had hovered nearby, her face a perfect mask of loving concern. "Oh, Sophia, you gave us such a scare. It's a good thing we're here to look after you." They fussed over me, making me a cup of tea I didn't want and insisting I go lie down. "You've had a long day, you need to rest," Amber said, fluffing my pillows with an exaggerated tenderness that made my stomach turn. I allowed them to tuck me in, my feigned weakness their greatest triumph. The moment my bedroom door clicked shut, I was no longer a frail old woman. I was a predator, waiting in the shadows. I opened the gardening app on my phone, and my living room appeared on the screen, perfectly framed by the lens above the mantelpiece. I heard the distinct pop of a wine cork, followed by the clinking of glasses. "To our new house!" Amber's voice chirped, bright and triumphant, the same sweet tone she used when she'd first complimented my cozy apartment. Joseph laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Don't call it that yet. We still have to get her to sign the papers." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Did you see her tonight? She's losing it faster than I thought. After that little stove incident, she'll sign anything we put in front of her. She's terrified of being alone." They laughed together, a conspiratorial sound that physically hurt to hear. I listened as they mocked my clothes, my old furniture, and my failing memory. Each word was a fresh cut, but with every cut, the cold resolve inside me hardened into steel. This pain was temporary. The recording was forever. Just as they were discussing what color to paint the living room, the doorbell rang. On my phone screen, I saw them both freeze, their expressions turning to annoyance. I composed my face into one of sleepy confusion and walked out of my room. "Is someone here?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. It was my next-door neighbor, Carol, a kind woman I had known for over 20 years. She held a plate of Christmas cookies. "Sophia, I'm so sorry to bother you late," she said, her eyes flicking nervously toward Joseph and Amber. "I just saw the lights on and wanted to bring these over." After a few minutes of forced, awkward pleasantries, Joseph and Amber announced they had to leave. As I walked Carol to the door, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Sophia, I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. "Don't say anything, just listen. After you all had that fight on Christmas Eve, I saw them in their car. They were celebrating, high-fiving Sophia. He was laughing. It felt wrong. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Her words were a balm on my raw nerves, a validation from the outside world that I was not crazy. Someone else had seen their cruelty. When the door closed behind her, I went back to my room, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a surge of power. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and saved the audio file. A small window popped up, asking for a file name. My fingers moved swiftly, typing the 2 words that sealed their fate: Exhibit. I now had irrefutable proof of their malicious intent. I looked out my window and saw Carol walking back to her house. She paused on her porch, turned, and looked right at my window, as if she knew I was watching. Her eyes were filled with concern, but also with a fierce loyalty. "Whatever you're planning, Sophia," I imagined her saying, her voice a silent promise in the cold night air, "you're not alone in this." The sheaf of papers Joseph placed on my lap felt as heavy as a tombstone. It was a Saturday afternoon, and they had arrived under the pretense of bringing me groceries. The air in the living room was deceptively calm, smelling of the lemon polish I had used that morning, but I could feel the predatory energy radiating from them. They were circling, ready for the kill. Amber sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture a little too perfect, her smile a little too bright. Joseph stood over me, his shadow falling across the pages. "It's just a formality, Mom," he said, tapping a line on the top page with his finger, "to let us help with the bills, manage your accounts so you don't have to worry about a thing." I remembered Michael Chen's warning, his voice echoing in my mind from 2 days before. They will disguise the power of attorney as a helpful gesture. They will make it sound like they are doing you a favor. Joseph's words were a perfect, chilling echo. I put on my reading glasses, squinting at the dense block of legal text. I let my hand tremble just slightly as I held the first page. "Oh my," I murmured, my voice a frail, reedy version of itself. There are so many words. They're all fuzzy. I looked up at Joseph, my eyes wide with practiced confusion. "What does it say again, dear?" Patiently, condescendingly, he explained it for the third time. "It just gives me the ability to sign checks for you, Mom, to make sure your mortgage and utilities are paid on time. It protects you." "Protects me?" I repeated, letting my gaze drift toward the window. "That's what David used to say." I let his name hang in the air, a ghost to haunt them. David always handled these things. My head hurts when I try to think about all these numbers. I press my fingers to my temple, a gesture of a weary, overwhelmed woman. Amber leaned forward, her voice syrupy. "That's why we're here to help, Sophia, so you don't have to get headaches. All you have to do is sign right here." She pointed to a line at the bottom of the page, a black X marking the spot. I let my eyes wander over the document again, pretending to read a random paragraph. "Who is Mr. Albright?" I asked, pointing to a name in the text. "That's our lawyer, Mom," Joseph said, his patience wearing thin. "We've been over this." "Oh, I thought you said his name was Johnson?" I asked, my voice wavering. I was playing my part, and I was playing it well. I could see a muscle twitching in Joseph's jaw. He was getting frustrated. For 20 minutes, I kept them in this loop of confusion. I asked the same questions over and over. I mixed up their names with their father's. I complained that the light was too dim to read properly. Finally, I pushed the papers back into Joseph's hands. "I can't," I said, my voice cracking with fake emotion. "I can't sign something I don't understand. I need to talk to that man David used to see, the lawyer, Michael, something." That was when Amber's composure finally shattered. "For crying out loud, Sophia, it's not that complicated." "Just sign the paper," she snapped, her voice sharp and ugly. The mask of the loving daughter-in-law fell away, revealing the greedy, impatient shrew underneath. She immediately covered her mouth, her eyes widening in a silent gasp as Joseph shot her a look of pure fury. The sudden outburst hung in the air, more damning than any of my recordings. I let a tear well up in my eye, letting it trace a slow path down my cheek. I shrank back in my chair, the picture of a wounded, frightened old woman. Joseph rushed to my side, kneeling down. "You've upset her now," he hissed at Amber, before turning to me with a fake soothing voice that made my skin crawl. "It's okay, Mom. She didn't mean it. We're just worried. We'll come back another time. We'll give you a few days to rest." He helped me up and guided me toward my bedroom as if I were an invalid. As they left, I saw the fury in Amber's eyes. They knew they had lost this round, and I knew they would be back, more determined than ever. The sound of the front door opening when I was supposed to be the only one home sent a genuine jolt of fear through me, even though I was expecting it. I was lying in my bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, pretending to be deep in an afternoon nap. On the phone, hidden beneath the quilt, the screen glowed, showing a live feed from the camera in the entryway. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I watched as Joseph slid a key into the lock, a key I had given him for emergencies only, and pushed the door open. He and Amber slipped inside, followed by a tall man in a sharp suit carrying a leather briefcase. They spoke in hushed tones, believing me to be asleep down the hall. "She's been napping a lot lately," Joseph whispered. "We should have at least an hour." I watched them on my small screen as they moved into the living room, their forms slightly distorted by the pinhole lens. The man in the suit surveyed the room with a professional, detached air. "The foundation is solid and the location is prime real estate," the man's voice declared, clear and crisp through my phone speaker. I remembered Amber's first visit, her eyes scanning the very same room with that same cold, appraising look. She'd been shopping for a home then, too. I just hadn't realized it was mine. I recorded everything as they moved through the house like vultures picking over a carcass. They went from room to room, the stranger taking notes on a tablet while Joseph and Amber pointed out features. They spent a long time in the kitchen, my kitchen, where I had baked thousands of cookies and countless birthday cakes. "This will all have to be gutted, of course," Amber said, her voice full of disdain. "I'm thinking white marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, an island in the middle." She was redecorating my life before I'd even left it. They came back to the living room, standing directly in front of the mantelpiece. The agent looked at his notes. "The market is hot right now," he said. "Given the square footage and the neighborhood, even with the necessary updates, you could easily get $1.5 million for this place as is." Amber let out a small, ecstatic gasp. $1.5 million. The number, spoken so casually, seemed to suck all the air from my bedroom. That was the price tag they had put on my home, on 40 years of memories, on my entire existence. "We'll gut the kitchen first," Amber said excitedly, her voice a triumphant whisper. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the decorative scrollwork where I knew a camera was hidden. "And these old curtains have to go. They're absolutely hideous." I felt a tear of pure rage slide down my temple and into my hair. They weren't just trying to take my house, they were trying to erase me from it. The agent, ever the professional, finally asked the one question that mattered. "Is your mother fully on board with the sale?" There was a short pause. Then I heard Joseph laugh. It was a short, dismissive, ugly sound that broke what was left of my heart. "She will be," he said with chilling confidence. "She doesn't really have a choice in the matter anymore." After they left, after the click of the front door locking echoed through the silent house, I lay in bed for another 10 minutes, my body trembling with a fury so profound it left me breathless. I finally rose and walked into the living room they had just violated. The air still seemed to carry their scent, Amber's cloying perfume and the stench of their greed. I took out my phone, saved the video file, and labeled it with cold precision, Exhibit B. Just as I did, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Michael. "They're getting desperate. The final trap is ready." I was arranging a bouquet of fresh daisies in my kitchen when Joseph called, his voice laced with a false, sugary concern that made my skin crawl. It had been 3 days since the incident with the real estate agent, 3 days of unnerving silence from their end. I had spent the time in a state of calm readiness, reviewing my evidence, speaking with Michael, and waiting for their next move. Now, it was coming. "Mom, how are you feeling?" he asked, the feigned warmth in his tone almost comical. "A little tired, dear," I replied, my voice deliberately frail. "But I'm all right." That's good, he said quickly. "Listen, Amber and I have been talking, and we think it's time. Mom, we need to have a serious family talk about your future." The words were almost identical to those he'd used just before the disastrous Christmas dinner. Back then, they had filled me with dread. Now they filled me with a cold, thrilling sense of anticipation. The end game was here. "We'd like to come over on Sunday," he continued. "Amber's parents want to be there too, just for support. We can all just sit down and figure out the best path forward for you." They were bringing witnesses. How perfect. They wanted an audience for my surrender. They would get one, just not in the way they imagined. "That sounds okay, Joseph," I whispered, injecting a note of weary resignation into my voice. "Whatever you think is best." "Great, Mom. We'll see you Sunday at 2 o'clock, he said, relief flooding his voice. He hung up, no doubt believing he had just secured his victory. I placed my phone on the counter and smiled. Immediately, I opened my gardening app and switched to the live camera feeds. My instincts told me they wouldn't be able to resist gloating. I was right. I toggled to the audio feed from the microphone hidden in their apartment's living room, a late addition to my security package. Joseph had just walked in the door, and Amber was waiting for him. I heard him on speakerphone. "It's done," he announced, his voice booming with triumph. She agreed. Sunday at 2. She sounds completely defeated. Amber let out a delighted shriek. "Oh, it's finally happening. Did you call Mr. Albright?" "Putting him on the line right now," Joseph said. A moment later, a smooth, professional voice joined the call. It was their lawyer. "Good news, I take it?" Mr. Albright asked. "She's finally broken," Amber said, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "She's ready to sign. We told her my parents were coming for support. She didn't suspect a thing." I listened, my face a mask of stone, as they laid out their entire plan for their lawyer. "Once we have that signature on Sunday, we'll have her in the home by the end of the month. Then we sell," Joseph stated, as if discussing a simple business transaction. "We'll have the proceeds from the house by spring." "Excellent," the lawyer replied, his voice unctuous. "You've both handled this situation with effective persistence. Just make sure the witnesses are present when she signs. It will make it much harder for anyone to contest it later." The conversation continued for another few minutes, a sickening display of greed and conspiracy. They laughed about what they would do with the money, the trips they would take, the cars they would buy. They were spending my life savings before I was even out of my own home. I let them finish. I listened to every self-congratulatory word, every cruel joke. Then, when the call ended, I stopped the recording. This was it, the ultimate weapon. Not just their plan, but proof of a legal conspiracy. I held in my hand the audio file that would detonate their entire world. My fingers flew across my phone screen, composing a new text message. It was addressed to Michael Chen. The message was short, devoid of all emotion, a simple and direct command. "We have them. Prepare the documents for Sunday and invite a notary. On Sunday afternoon, my home, the prize they so desperately coveted, was transformed into a theater for their final downfall. I had spent the morning preparing, not in a panic, but with the serene focus of a general on the eve of a decisive battle. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea, its fragrant steam filling the living room. I arranged a plate of my homemade shortbread cookies on the coffee table, the very table where Joseph had placed the brochure that started all of this. I was playing the part of the docile, compliant mother to the very end. But beneath my calm exterior, my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. Amber's parents arrived first, precisely at 2 o'clock. Her mother, a woman with a perpetually pursed-lipped expression, gave me a pitying look and handed me a cheap box of chocolates from the drugstore. "We're so sorry you're going through this, Sophia," she said, her voice oozing false sympathy. "But it's for the best. You'll be so much more comfortable." It was a pathetic echo of the festive gifts from Christmas, a cheap offering meant to soften the blow of my dispossession. Her father simply nodded, his eyes already scanning the room as if he were estimating its value. 5 minutes later, Joseph and Amber walked in. They were beaming, their faces alight with a barely contained, triumphant glee. When they saw the tea service and my placid expression, they exchanged a look of pure, smug satisfaction. It was clear they thought my spirit was broken, that I was ready to be led quietly to the slaughter. "Oh, Mom, this is lovely," Joseph said, his voice a smooth, soothing balm of lies. "See, Amber, I told you she would understand." He sat down on the sofa, taking command of the room, of my room, for what he believed would be the last time. Amber's parents settled in, forming a united front, their self-righteous expressions positioning them as the compassionate witnesses to this necessary, if unpleasant, family duty. They all made small talk, their words buzzing around me like annoying flies. I simply smiled, poured tea, and waited. The trap was set. The players were all on stage. The audience was in place. Finally, Joseph cleared his throat and picked up a handsome leather-bound folder from the floor beside him. He placed it on the coffee table with an air of finality. "Mom," he began, his voice taking on a somber, practiced tone. "We're all here because we love you and because we are deeply concerned about—" Ding dong. The doorbell cut through his sanctimonious speech, sharp and clear. Joseph froze, his mouth half open. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Are you expecting someone, Mom?" "I am," I said calmly, rising from my chair. "Just a couple more guests to help with this important decision." I opened the door to reveal Michael Chen, my late husband's lawyer, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that radiated quiet authority. Beside him stood a stern-faced woman in her 50s, her severe haircut and the heavy briefcase in her hand screaming, "Official business." Joseph's confident smile faltered. He stood up, his posture suddenly rigid. Amber stared, her teacup frozen halfway to her lips. "Mom, who are they?" Joseph asked, his voice no longer smooth but tight with a dawning, terrible suspicion. I stepped aside, allowing my guests to enter the living room. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly, the air crackling with a new, dangerous energy. I closed the door and turned to face my son. "They're my support," I said, my voice even and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "Since this is such an important decision about my future, I thought it best to have my legal advisor present." Joseph and Amber exchanged a panicked look. This was not part of their plan. The carefully constructed theater of a loving family intervention had just been invaded by two people who dealt not in emotions, but in facts, figures, and the cold, hard letter of the law. The air in the room crackled as they realized, with a sudden, sickening jolt, that they were no longer in control. Joseph cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of a room that had already slipped from his grasp. The presence of my lawyer had clearly rattled him, but he was committed to his script. He forced a strained, compassionate smile and sat on the edge of the coffee table, leaning toward me. "As we've discussed, Mom," he began, his voice strained, "your health requires us to take these necessary steps." He gestured to the power of attorney papers on the table, the same ones from their last visit, a sheaf of documents that represented the final instrument of my erasure. "We're all here to make this transition as smooth and painless as possible. This just gives us the ability to look after you properly." He picked up a pen and offered it to me, his hand steady, his eyes holding a look of manufactured sincerity that turned my stomach. I let the pen hang in the air between us. I didn't look at it. I didn't look at him. I looked at the large, dark screen of the television that hung on the wall across from me. "I agree that we should be guided by the truth," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "In fact, I've compiled some moments from the past few weeks to help us all remember what's really been happening." Before anyone could react, I picked up the television remote from the side table. With a single, deliberate press of a button, the screen flickered to life. The initial confusion in the room was palpable. Then, a high-angle shot of my own living room filled the screen. The image was perfectly clear. On the screen, two figures, Joseph and Amber, were raising glasses of wine. "To our new house," Amber's voice, bright and triumphant, filled the room. Joseph laughed and clinked his glass against hers. Amber's mother made a small, confused noise, her hand flying to her throat. Joseph and Amber froze on the sofa, their faces draining of all color. But the show was just beginning. The video cut to a new scene, a weekday afternoon. Joseph and Amber were on screen again, this time with the real estate agent walking through my home. The agent's voice was clear. "You could easily get $1.5 million for this place as is." The video showed Amber's ecstatic face, her hands clapping together in childish glee. "We'll gut the kitchen first," her voice said, echoing her on-screen self, "and these old curtains have to go." Amber's father, who had been sitting upright and proud, seemed to shrink in his chair. He stared at his daughter on the screen as if she were a monster he had never met. The video cut again, showing the agent asking his final, fateful question. Is your mother fully on board with the sale? The entire room held its breath, waiting for the answer they already knew was coming. On the screen, my son laughed that ugly, dismissive laugh. "She will be," his voice declared, filling the room with his betrayal. "She doesn't really have a choice in the matter anymore." The screen suddenly went black. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a new sound began to play, the clear, unmistakable audio of a phone call. It was the recording of them speaking to their lawyer. "She's finally broken," Amber's voice said, sharp and venomous. "Once we have that signature on Sunday, we'll have her in the home by the end of the month." Joseph's voice continued, cold and businesslike. "Then we sell." "Excellent," their lawyer's smooth voice replied. "You've both handled this situation with effective persistence." A horrified gasp ripped through the room. It was Amber's mother. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked from the dark screen to her daughter, her expression one of dawning, sickening realization. The recording ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight broken only by Amber's ragged, panicked breathing. Everyone stared at them, at the two people who had just been so thoroughly and methodically unmasked. Their faces, once so smug and confident, were now a mixture of shock, disgust, and pure, unadulterated disbelief. The silence stretched on, a suffocating void where a family's love used to be. The faces in the room were a gallery of ruin. Amber's mother was weeping silently into her hands. Her father stared at the blank television screen, his face a thunderous mask of shame and rage. And Joseph, he looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his mother, but as a force he could not comprehend. The confident man from Christmas Eve was gone, replaced by a broken boy lost in the wreckage he had created. You, he stammered, his face ashen, his hands trembling. He looked from me to the damning screen and back again, his mind clearly unable to process the speed and totality of his downfall. It was Michael Chen who broke the spell. He stepped forward into the center of the room, his movements precise and deliberate. He placed his leather briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a soft, authoritative click. "Now for the actual legal matters of the day," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. He pulled out a crisp, folded document. "Mr. Hughes, this is a 30-day notice to vacate the premises at Unit 12B, Parkview Terrace." Joseph stared at him blankly. "What? That's my apartment." "No," Michael corrected him calmly. "It is your mother's apartment. She is the legal owner of the entire building, a fact you would have known if you had ever shown any genuine interest in her life rather than just her finances. Your lease is terminated." Amber let out a choked, incredulous sound. "You own—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. Michael didn't pause. He reached back into his briefcase and produced a thick file, dropping it onto the table with a heavy thud. "Furthermore, these are the statements for the discretionary support fund established by David Hughes. Over the past 3 years, a total of $123,000 has been disbursed to you and your wife for living expenses." He let that number hang in the air for a moment. Given the circumstances of fraud and malicious intent so clearly demonstrated here today, these are no longer considered gifts. They are now considered loans due upon demand, a demand which Mrs. Hughes, my client, is now making. You will be receiving a bill for the full amount, plus interest. Joseph looked like he had been physically struck. $123,000. It was a debt he could never hope to repay. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. But Michael wasn't finished. He pulled out one final slender envelope. "And finally, this." He handed it to Joseph. "A certified copy of your mother's newly revised and executed last will and trust. Your name, Mr. Hughes, has been removed entirely. Your inheritance, which you seem so eager to acquire, has been redirected in its entirety to the National Foundation for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. That was the final devastating blow. The poetic justice of it was so perfect, so absolute, it was almost beautiful. It was Amber's father who finally exploded. He shot to his feet, his face a deep mottled purple. He wasn't looking at me or Joseph. He was looking at his own daughter with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You!" he roared, his voice shaking with fury. "You married him for this. You lied to us. You stood in our home and cried about being poor while you were plotting to steal from this woman?" He pointed a trembling finger at Amber. "Get your things. You are not welcome in our house. Do not call us. Do not speak to us again. You have shamed our entire family." The public rejection by her own father was the final nail in her coffin. Amber collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with a single horrifying sob of utter despair. She had lost everything. Joseph sank to his knees, not in front of me, but in the middle of the room, a man who had just lost his past, his present, and his future in the span of 10 minutes. He stared at the polished hardwood floor, his shoulders shaking. "Mom," he whispered, the sound barely audible, a ghost of a word addressed to the floor. "What have I done?" The days that followed were filled with a profound and liberating silence. The phone no longer rang with manipulative demands. The air in my home, once thick with tension and unspoken resentments, felt lighter, cleaner. For the first time in years, I woke up in the morning without a knot of dread in my stomach, and the only agenda for the day was my own. A week after the confrontation, I was cleaning the living room when my hand brushed against it, the glossy brochure for the Golden Years home, still sitting on my coffee table where it had been left. I looked at the smiling, placid couple on the cover, a symbol of the life they had tried to force upon me. I picked it up, walked to the fireplace, and without a moment's hesitation, tore it in half, then in quarters, and threw the pieces into the hearth. I watched the smiling couple on the cover curl, blacken, and turn to ash. Later that afternoon, Michael called. His voice was all business, but I could detect a note of satisfaction. "Sophia, I have an update for you," he said. "As of this morning, Joseph and Amber have been evicted. They're currently staying at a budget motel off the highway. The ballroom management has filed a lawsuit for the unpaid balance of the wedding, and both their credit scores have been irrevocably destroyed." I listened, feeling not joy, but a quiet, somber sense of finality. "Thank you for letting me know, Michael." "They have made no attempt to contact me," he added. "I suspect they have no resources left to hire their own legal counsel." The consequences of their actions were unfolding exactly as they should, without any further intervention from me. That evening, Carol came over with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I saw the for sale sign go up in their front yard today," she said, pouring me a glass. "I thought this called for a celebration." She raised her glass. "To new beginnings." We sat on my porch as the sun went down, talking for hours. A real conversation between friends, free of agendas and manipulation. It was a simple, beautiful evening, a reminder of the healthy relationships I was now free to nurture. The next day, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was a furious, slanted scrawl I recognized as Amber's. I opened it with a strange sense of detachment. It was a rambling, hate-filled message, 4 pages of vitriol blaming me for ruining her life, for destroying her marriage, for being a cruel, vindictive old woman. A few months ago, her words would have shattered me. Now, I read them and felt nothing. It was like reading a letter from a stranger. I folded the pages, walked to the kitchen, and dropped them into the trash can without a second thought. That night, my phone buzzed with a notification, a new voicemail. My heart gave a small, nervous flutter when I saw the number. It was Joseph. I hesitated for a long moment, then pressed play. His voice filled the quiet room, but it was not the arrogant, condescending tone I had come to despise. It was broken. "Mom," he began, his voice thick and cracking. He took a ragged breath. I'm so sorry. I know you'll never forgive me. You shouldn't. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I did. The message ended with the sound of a choked sob. I stood there in the darkness, the phone in my hand, his broken voice echoing in the silence. A part of me, the mother in me, felt a pang of pity, but the woman who had fought for her life and her dignity knew better. I pressed my thumb to the screen, held it over his message, and swiped left. Delete. Forgiveness was a journey, not a destination, and my own journey was just beginning. 1 year later, I stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean in Santorini, the Greek sun warming my face, and I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh I hadn't felt in years. The sound was carried away on the breeze, mixing with the gentle lapping of the Aegean Sea against the white cliffs below. The world was a dizzying, beautiful expanse of blue and white, and for the first time, my own world felt just as open, just as full of possibility. I thought of David and the simple life he had wanted for us. We had always dreamed of seeing the Greek islands, a worn travel magazine with dog-eared pages sitting on his nightstand for years. I had honored his wish for privacy, and now I was honoring his wish for my happiness. I had sold the old house 6 months ago, not in a rush, but on my own terms, to a young family who promised to fill its rooms with laughter. The sale wasn't an ending, but a liberation, the closing of a door to a life that no longer existed, allowing me to open a new one. My travels were not an escape, but a rediscovery. And in between trips to Paris and Rome, I had found a new purpose. Back home, in a bright, sunny office downtown, the David Hughes Foundation for Elder Dignity had just completed its first year of operation. I had used a portion of the wealth I never knew I had to create the shield I wish I'd had, providing free legal aid and emotional support to seniors facing family financial abuse. We had a small staff, but a large mission, to turn pain into power. I rarely thought of Joseph anymore. I'd heard through the grapevine that he was working a manual labor job on the other side of the state. Amber had left him a few months after the court case, taking with her any remnants of the life they had tried to build on a foundation of lies. When I heard the news, I felt only a distant, fleeting pity. He was a stranger to me now, a ghost from another life, living with the consequences of his choices. He had made his bed of ashes, and now he had to lie in it. Last week, I had sat with Michael in the Foundation's boardroom, a space filled not with tension, but with hope. He slid the first annual report across the table to me. "Look at this, Sophia," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. The report detailed our work. We had helped over 24 families. We had stopped 3 fraudulent power of attorney cases, recovered tens of thousands of dollars for our clients, and provided counseling for countless others. "You did it, Sophia," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You turned your pain into a shield for others." Now, standing on this balcony, the sun setting over the endless sea, I thought of his words. A shield. David had given me a shield, and now I was passing it on. I looked out at the endless blue horizon, the line where the sea met the sky. I remembered my son's voice, sharp and cruel in the dim light of that last terrible Christmas Eve. "The best gift you could give me is you dying for my inheritance." He was wrong. My life, this new, strong, and purposeful life, filled with sunshine and laughter and the quiet satisfaction of helping others, was the greatest gift I had ever given myself. Looking out at that endless blue horizon, I finally understood the true meaning of freedom. I learned the hardest lesson of all. Setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty, but the ultimate act of self-respect. And you must be willing to lose a toxic relationship to save yourself. My new life, filled with peace and a purpose I never expected, is the true inheritance I fought to give myself, Have you ever had to turn a painful experience into your greatest source of strength? I would be honored to hear your story in the comments below.